Welcome back to another edition of Know the Foe. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, your Arkansas site in the Rivals Network. The Hogs gave number 2 Alabama a scare last week before falling 42-35, and now they're back in Fayetteville for their annual Black Friday matchup with Missouri. With that, it's time once again to go to behind enemy lines for some insider perspective on that upcoming game. Gabe DeArmond covers the Tigers for PowerMizzou.com, our friends over at the Missouri Rivals site. And he was kind enough to give us some time today. Gabe, appreciate it. How are you?
Not bad. Just trying to pack everything into like 2 days this week,
Exactly. It's always a short week for the football team, but also a short week for us sports writers. So, let's start with kind of a 10,000 foot view of Missouri's season. I know they had some close losses early, probably a disappointing start, but they've won their last 2 games, and now they're eligible for a bowl. How would you characterize year 2 of the Eli Drinkwitz era?
Well, it didn't start well. Actually, that's not true. It started okay. I mean, they put up a game at Kentucky in week 2, and everybody actually came out of that a little bit encouraged. And then I think where it really swung was week 4. They lost in overtime at Boston College, and Connor Basilak threw an interception. And then for the next 4 weeks, Missouri was just awful. I mean, didn't even show up against Tennessee, barely showed up against A&M. I mean, both those games were basically over 8 minutes into the game. And they were sitting, 3-4, and everybody thought, we don't know where this is going. They got healthy against North Texas, but then they go down, and it's weird to say in a 43-6 loss that they found some things they felt good about, but they went to Georgia and they actually played decent run defense. They had a couple freshmen move the ball at quarterback, and they felt okay coming out of that game. And then they came back, had a little confidence, beat South Carolina, beat Florida. And all of a sudden people are saying, hey, if you could get one more win, this thing really ended on a good note, right? Because I think preseason expectations were about 7-5. Some people had 8-4, but if they could beat Arkansas, this season probably ended up exactly where they'd expect, but maybe not in the way they expected. That said, obviously beating Arkansas is a little tougher than probably most people thought it was going to be 3 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. And diving into things more specifically ahead of that Arkansas game, I'm wondering what you could tell us about Connor Basilak. I know he's been hurt and missed some time, but has he made the strides you would expect from a quarterback in his second year as a starter?
Short answer, no. Longer answer, no, not at all. I mean, his numbers look very similar to what they were a year ago, but it hasn't been as good a year because last year his big strength, I mean, he was prototypical game manager, which everybody said is redshirt freshman, no issue, man. Just you don't have to go win games, just don't lose them. And he didn't do that as a freshman. And then this year, after that interception against BC, for his next, I want to say 5 games, he had 9 interceptions. And I mean, it was like 1 touchdown and 9 interceptions. It was not good at all. He got hurt at the end of the Vandy game, didn't play Georgia, but Missouri fans have wanted a new quarterback for a solid month. And Eli Drinkwitz just hasn't done it to the point where the last 2 home games, I mean, Basilak was booed, and fans will say, well, no, we were booing the coach. No, you were booing the coach for playing the quarterback. Everybody knows what you were booing. And, they've got a redshirt freshman named Brady Cook who has played a little bit, who we don't know a ton about. He's done what they've asked him to do. The one the fans want is the true freshman, Tyler Macon, because he's a 4-star kid, top 250, Elite 11 kid out of East St. Louis. And he just isn't ready. And it doesn't matter how much you tell the fans, look, he isn't ready. He can't go win games right now. That's the guy they want. They want to see him on the field. It's not going to happen this year. Basilak is the guy. And look, he deserves credit, right? He threw a game-winning 2-point conversion against Florida. Like that was a big play. Missouri fans, it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason because they've got 3 quarterbacks. They've got a top 150, 200-ish type kid coming in, Sam Horn, next year out of Georgia. Now, he's a baseball player too. He's not going to be here in the spring, so that might limit his ability to win the job. But I think Missouri goes into spring football with at least a 3-way competition for the starting quarterback next year.
And it hasn't been all bad on offense, though. I mean, this may surprise some folks, but Tyler Beatty, the running back, is fourth nationally and leads the SEC in rushing. But looking at his game by game log, it seems like he either goes for 200 or he's held under 100. Well, why is that? I mean, is there anything you've noticed with his season?
Well, there are a couple things there. The Southeast Missouri State game, he had 9 yards for 9 carries for 81 yards, and then they sat him for 2 quarters. The Georgia game, he had 9 for 41 and basically didn't play the second half because that was out of reach the other way. So yeah, he's got 4 200-yard games. He had 146 last week against Florida, including 2 carries for 25 yards for the touchdown in overtime. I mean, he has been, a couple weeks ago, somebody asked Eli Drinkwitz just what's his value been? And he said, well, he's been 5 wins valuable. And that time Missouri was 5-5. Now, what you take from that is Missouri doesn't win a game without Tyler Beatty on this team. And it's not that far from true. I mean, they still would have beat SEMO. They probably still would have beat North Texas. But I think that's it. I don't think they win another game without him on this roster. And it's weird to say that the most valuable player in the SEC is on a 6-5 team. But I'm not saying Beatty's the best player in the SEC. I'm just saying if you take him off this team, it truly makes a 4-win difference. And I don't know if there's anybody else you can say that about in this league.
That's impressive, and just I'm excited to see what he looks like on Friday. But moving over to the other side of the ball, Missouri, statistically at least, has the second worst defense in the conference, ahead of only Vanderbilt. Is that a matter of talent? Is it a scheme issue? Are there injuries that have led to it? Or what would you kind of diagnose those issues to?
I feel like you just took that question directly off my message board for the first 2.5 months of the season, because that's what everybody wants to know. And the weird thing is, it actually has been pretty good for the last 2 weeks. But it was, I don't even have words. I mean, I called it the worst defense in the history of organized football on our site a couple times. It was horrendous. I mean, they gave up almost 300 yards rushing to Central Michigan in the opener. And everybody said, well, it's the first game. And this Lou Nichols kid, who actually is the second leading rusher in the country now, you never know. And then they gave up over 300 to Kentucky. And everybody said, yeah, but Kentucky likes to run the ball. And then they just kept doing it. I mean, they could literally, all you had to do was turn around, hand the ball off, and you were getting 7 yards of play. That's not even an exaggeration. It was like 6.8 yards a carry for the first half of the season. They have made some personnel changes. They moved Chad Bailey in at middle linebacker. Blaze Aldridge, a transfer from Rice, who started this season at middle linebacker, actually got benched. Now is playing the weak side linebacker. So they've kind of flip-flopped that. Devin Nicholson has gone from starting every game for 1.5 years to 4 snaps the last 2 weeks. That's made a difference. But is it talent? A little bit, but they weren't nearly as bad as they looked. Is it scheme? Probably a little bit, but they've gotten better. So 2 things are at play that people don't like to acknowledge. One, they just have improved, right? They're playing better. And 2, we hate the answer. Well, what's wrong? Well, we're just not executing. But that really is the answer. Like, Missouri's defensive line was getting beat up front for 8 games. And I mean, I'm not just talking about kind of moved out of the way a little bit. I'm talking about you went back and watched plays and they were getting moved off their spot by 3 and 4 yards. And those guys are winning battles now. Isaiah McGuire looks like a guy who should be, maybe get some preseason all SEC talk next year. Trajan Jeffcoat has suddenly become the player we all thought he was going to be at the beginning of the season. So more than anything, they're playing better now.
I think some Arkansas fans might argue with you about the worst defense in organized football. It's not too far removed from John Chavis. So,
okay.
But I digress. You kind of mentioned a few guys right there, but I mean, who are the key players on Missouri's defense that Arkansas fans should be aware of on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, Jeffcoat and McGuire at defensive end, I think, kind of set the tone for this defense. I mean, like I said, they really didn't do anything up front for 7-8 weeks, and now those guys are playing well. Those have been the league's defensive lineman of the week each of the last 2 weeks. So those guys are important in helping set the edge on the run. Bailey is a guy that has changed things up a little bit at linebacker. And then in the defensive backfield, they get a kid, their slot corner, which I mean, I assume that means he's going to be up against Treylon Burks quite a bit, is Chris Abrams-Drain. He's a kid who actually came to Missouri in the 2020 class as a receiver. made the switch to defensive back about halfway through last season. And he's been Missouri's best defensive player. I think he's got 4 interceptions. He's had another couple taken away by penalty. But him and then Jalen Carlisle at safety are, they've been opportunistic. I'm not going to say they've been perfect because nothing on this defense has been perfect. There have been some hiccups, but those two both have like 4 picks and have made some plays.
And as we all know, I mean, everyone can talk about the Iron Bowl and Michigan, Ohio State, but this is the famed Battle Line rivalry presented by Shelter Insurance.
Yes,
it seems like Coach Drinkwitz up there is, based on his comments at SEC Media Days and stuff, has kind of bought into the rivalry, and Sam Pittman has said all the right things and with the media, but the fans here in Arkansas aren't quite there. What's kind of the feeling up there in Missouri? The fan base, do they buy the rivalry?
I mean, it's it's the closest thing they have to a rivalry right now, I guess. I mean, the truth is Missouri's series against South Carolina has been a more entertaining series, and it's been, I say more competitive. I don't mean to say this hasn't been competitive, but let's be honest. Arkansas's got to win one here to get that going back a little bit, but it's getting there. It's okay. I think there are some storylines with Drinkwitz being, he talked about this week sitting in the southeast end zone and in Reynolds Stadium and watching games, and how it'll be a little bit weird to go back. And obviously Barry's down there, and now Trey Williams and Markel Utzi are playing. So, and Sam Pittman long ago was an assistant here. So there are some ties, but it'll be interesting to see going forward. I mean, we haven't really had a year where both of these teams are actually good and playing for something at the same time. Arkansas obviously has really rebounded this year. Missouri's 6-5. I mean, really, I don't know what these teams are playing for other than a little bit of pride and a little bit better bowl game. It's decent, right? I mean, maybe get the corporate sponsor name off of it, but I don't know. Drinkwitz made a big deal of winning the Mayor's Cup 2 weeks ago against South Carolina. So I guess if there's a trophy, it's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, the last thing I got for you. Last I checked, I think Arkansas is a 14.5-point favorite. You don't necessarily have to give a prediction here, but I'm curious what maybe you'd say the keys are to Missouri, staying in the game, and do you think they're capable of pulling off the upset?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that line was higher than I expected. I definitely expected Arkansas to be favored, but I thought it'd be closer to 10. Now, I think the lines are a little bit skewed by the fact that legitimately Missouri was the last team to cover in America. The first time they covered, they were a 38.5-point underdog to Georgia, and they lost by 37. So, but they have now covered 3 straight weeks. So it was a little higher than I thought, but Arkansas is clearly the better team so far. They're playing at home. And I think Missouri has to just limit the huge plays for Arkansas. I mean, make them, if they're going to go 80 yards, and they're going to go 80 yards a couple times, then make them do it on, 9 plays, 10 plays, 11 plays, rather than letting Burks loose for 70 or something like that. So I think that's huge. And then offensively, I mean, they've just got to do something to help Tyler Beatty, because I don't think it's realistic to say, hey, we'll just have Tyler Beatty get 300 yards from scrimmage and win this game. I mean, it's happened a few times, but this would be Missouri's best win of the season. And so they're going to need some other guys. They're going to need something out of the passing game. They're going to need some guys to make some plays, because I don't think it's reasonable to go in and win this game 17-14.
Yeah, I'm expecting it to be a little bit more high scoring than that for sure. That's all I got for you, Gabe. Thanks again for giving us some insight on the Tigers. As a reminder to everybody, this game is on Friday at 2:30. It's going to be on CBS. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, so that way you can always see these Know the Foe interviews, as well as press conferences, practice clips. We got recruiting videos up there. And then, as always, be sure to check out HawgBeat.com for coverage of all things Arkansas.